The Swedish consul's car stops outside the Hotel Maurice at 0900 hours. August 25th, 1944. Raoul Nordling steps out onto the Rue de Rivoli and walks toward the entrance. Inside, General Dietrich von Choltitz, military governor of Gross Paris, awaits. On his desk lies a direct order from Adolf Hitler, dated August 23rd. Paris must not fall into enemy hands except as a field of ruins. The order continues with specific instructions. Destroy all bridges across the Seine, demolish the Eiffel Tower, blow up the Arc de Triomphe, burn the Louvre, level government buildings, create rubble that will slow Allied advance for weeks. Von Choltitz has had 36 hours to execute these orders. He has done nothing. The demolition charges sit in warehouses. The engineers wait for orders. The explosives remain unstored. Paris stands intact. But the Allies approach from three directions. The French 2nd Armored Division drives from the south. American forces advance from the west. The French resistance controls entire neighborhoods inside the city. Von Choltitz must decide: obey Hitler's order and destroy Paris, or disobey and preserve the city while accepting probable execution for insubordination. Nordling enters von Choltitz's office at 0912 hours. The two men have met several times during the previous week, discussing potential surrender terms. Nordling, officially neutral as Swedish consul, but secretly coordinating between resistance, Free French, and German forces, carries a message from resistance leader Alexandre Parodi. The message offers terms: surrender Paris intact, receive treatment as prisoners of war under Geneva Convention, avoid street-by-street fighting that will destroy the city and kill thousands. Von Choltitz listens, then responds: Herr Nordling, I am a soldier. I have orders from the Führer himself to defend Paris to the last man and to leave the enemy only ruins. How can I disobey such an order? Nordling replies quietly: General, you also have orders to defend other cities in the past. Did you always execute them exactly as written? The conversation, recorded in Nordling's post-war memoir, captures the tension between military duty and human morality that defines the liberation of Paris. To understand how Paris avoided destruction while most German commanders followed Hitler's scorched earth orders elsewhere, you must return to August 9th, 1944. General Dietrich von Choltitz arrives in Paris to assume command of Gross Paris garrison. Von Choltitz, age 50, brings experience from the Eastern Front, where he commanded forces during the siege of Sevastopol and the destruction of Rotterdam. His reputation as a tough, reliable commander who follows orders precisely earned him this assignment. Hitler personally selects von Choltitz to hold Paris at all costs. The situation von Choltitz inherits proves deteriorating rapidly. The Allied breakout from Normandy succeeds beyond German expectations. American forces, breaking through at Avranches, sweep across France faster than German forces can retreat. The German 7th Army, caught in the Falaise pocket, faces annihilation. Paris, 400 miles behind what was supposed to be a stable front line, suddenly becomes part of an active combat zone. The garrison under von Choltitz's command numbers approximately 20,000 troops, but quality proves questionable. The forces include remnants of regular infantry divisions retreating from Normandy, security battalions composed of older reservists, administrative personnel, Luftwaffe ground crew whose airfields have been overrun, various support units, combat effective strength, perhaps 5,000 troops, artillery, minimal, armor, approximately 50 tanks and self-propelled guns, mostly obsolescent models or training vehicles, ammunition, adequate for several days of intense fighting only. Against this force, the French resistance inside Paris grows daily more bold. The FFI, Force Française de l'Intérieur, numbers approximately 20,000 active members within the city. They lack heavy weapons, artillery, tanks, but they possess intimate knowledge of the city, popular support, and growing confidence as Allied forces approach. More critically, they control or contest entire districts. German forces cannot move freely through much of Paris without risking ambush. The political situation proves even more complex. General Charles de Gaulle, leading the Free French from Algiers, demands that French forces liberate Paris. De Gaulle understands that whoever liberates Paris will control France politically. If American forces enter Paris first, de Gaulle's position as France's legitimate leader becomes questionable. If French forces, specifically his 2nd Armored Division under General Philippe Leclerc, liberate the city, de Gaulle's authority becomes unassailable. But the Allied Supreme Commander, General Dwight Eisenhower, prefers bypassing Paris. His operational plan calls for American forces to drive east toward Germany, surrounding and destroying German armies in the field. Paris represents logistical nightmare, a city of 3 million civilians requiring food, fuel, medicine, all of which must come from Allied supply lines already stretched to breaking. Eisenhower calculates that supplying Paris will consume 4,000 tons of supplies daily, supplies desperately needed by combat units pursuing the German army. The resistance leadership inside Paris, particularly Alexandre Parodi and Henri Roll-Tanguy, face different calculus. They watch American forces bypass Paris to the south. They fear the Allies might leave Paris unoccupied, allowing German forces to regroup or destroy the city during retreat. They also compete politically with communist elements within the resistance who advocate immediate uprising regardless of Allied plans. On August 10th, von Choltitz receives his first direct communication from Hitler regarding Paris defense. The message, transmitted through OKW, orders establishment of defensive positions on both banks of the Seine, preparation of all bridges for demolition, fortification of government buildings, and requisition of civilian resources for defense. The order concludes, the Führer expects that Paris will be held indefinitely against all attacks. Von Choltitz begins implementing these orders while simultaneously evaluating their feasibility. He tours the city, examining defensive positions. The assessment proves sobering. Paris, designed for beauty rather than defense, offers few natural defensive positions. The broad boulevards permit rapid movement by attacking forces. The buildings, while providing concealment, lack structural strength for sustained combat. The bridges, beautiful and historic, prove impossible to defend effectively. Most critically, the civilian population, hostile to German occupation, will support attackers rather than defenders. Von Choltitz requests reinforcements. OKW responds that no reinforcements are available. He requests authority to evacuate non-essential personnel. OKW orders all German forces to remain in position. He requests clarification of how long he must hold Paris. OKW responds, until relieved or until the city's destruction makes further defense impossible. By August 15th, von Choltitz recognizes his situation is hopeless militarily. He cannot hold Paris against determined attack. His forces lack the strength, the supplies, and the mobility. But he also recognizes that Hitler's order to destroy Paris if he cannot hold it places him in an impossible position. Execute the order, and he becomes responsible for destroying one of Europe's great cities. Refuse the order, and he faces court-martial and execution for disobedience. The tension increases on August 19th when the resistance launches general uprising. Communist-influenced elements within the FFY, acting without coordination with either Allied command or Free French leadership, seize control of police stations, government buildings, and entire neighborhoods. German forces respond with limited counterattacks, but avoid committing forces to sustained street fighting. Von Choltitz faces immediate decision. He can order his forces to suppress the uprising ruthlessly, as German forces did in Warsaw during the same period. The comparison proves relevant. In Warsaw, German forces receive identical orders to destroy the city and crush resistance. SS units and Wehrmacht divisions proceed to burn Warsaw systematically, killing over 200,000 civilians and destroying 80% of the city. Von Choltitz knows this. His orders from Hitler essentially demand Warsaw-style destruction in Paris, but von Choltitz hesitates. Multiple factors influence his decision. First, practical military assessment suggests that crushing the uprising will consume forces needed for defense against Allied attack. Second, destroying Paris serves no military purpose beyond denying the Allies intact infrastructure, a benefit outweighed by the international condemnation Germany will face. Third, and perhaps most importantly, von Choltitz recognizes that the war is lost and that history will judge his actions. This last factor deserves examination. By late August 1944, most German officers recognize that Germany cannot win the war. The question becomes how to lose. Total destruction fighting to the last, or negotiated and preserving some German territory and population. Officers who believe destruction serves no purpose begin seeking ways to avoid unnecessary damage while maintaining appearance of following orders. Von Choltitz employs several tactics. He orders limited responses to resistance attacks, sufficient to maintain appearance of resistance without committing to full-scale combat. He permits Swedish consul Nordling to negotiate local truces, allowing civilians to evacuate combat areas. He delays implementing demolition orders, claiming he awaits proper explosive supplies or technical specialists. He reports to OKW that he continues preparing demolitions while actually doing minimal preparation. On August 20th, Hitler's headquarters sends liaison officer Lieutenant General Hans Speidel to verify that von Koltitz is executing demolition orders. Speidel, actually sympathetic to the conspiracy against Hitler that failed in the July 20th assassination attempt, reports to OKW that von Koltitz proceeds with preparations, but the technical difficulties delay execution. This report buys von Koltitz additional time. But time runs out rapidly. On August 22nd, American forces reach the Seine south of Paris. On August 23rd, Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division receives orders from de Gaulle to advance on Paris immediately, with or without American authorization. On August 24th, resistance fighters inside Paris control much of the city's core, pinning German forces in isolated strongpoints. Von Koltitz receives another direct order from Hitler on August 23rd. This order, more specific than previous communications, states, Paris must not fall into enemy hands except as a field of ruins. Demolish all bridges, destroy the Eiffel Tower, level government buildings, use whatever means necessary. Report when demolitions are complete. Von Koltitz assembles his staff at 0800 hours. August 24th, he reads Hitler's order aloud. He then asks for status reports on demolition preparations. The reports prove telling. The chief engineer, Major General Rudolf Hubner, reports that explosive charges have been prepared for all Seine bridges, but installation remains incomplete. Workers report resistance from French laborers who sabotage equipment and delay work. Von Koltitz asks, when can we execute demolitions? Hubner responds, 48 hours minimum, perhaps 72 hours. Von Koltitz dismisses the staff and sits alone in his office. Outside, small arms fire crackles across Paris as resistance fighters engage German outposts. Von Koltitz knows that French tanks will arrive within hours, not days. He knows that his 48-hour delay estimate makes bridge demolition impossible before Allied forces arrive. He also knows that this delay, whether intentional or genuine, means he will disobey Hitler's order. At 1430 hours, August 24th, elements of Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division enter Paris from the south. Captain Raymond Dron, commanding a small detachment of tanks and armored cars, pushes through light German resistance and reaches the Hôtel de Ville in central Paris. The arrival, earlier than expected, finds German forces unprepared for coordinated defense. Von Koltitz, informed of French tanks in the city center, orders his forces to establish defensive perimeter around key government buildings and military installations. He specifically orders the bridges left intact for potential counterattack. This order, directly contrary to Hitler's demolition directive, represents von Koltitz's final decision. He will not destroy Paris. He will defend key positions to maintain appearance of obeying orders, but he will not execute scorched earth policy. The fighting on August 24th and 25th proves sporadic rather than sustained. German forces defend Hotel Meurice, the Luxembourg Palace, the Chamber of Deputies, and several other locations. But they do not contest every street. They do not fight to the last man. They engage when attacked directly but avoid initiating combat. The casualty figures reflect this pattern. Approximately 1,000 French military killed or wounded, 500 German soldiers killed or wounded, 800 civilians killed. These numbers, while tragic, prove far lower than sustained urban combat would produce. At 0930 hours, August 25th, French forces surround the Hotel Meurice. Von Koltitz, isolated with approximately 500 soldiers and minimal ammunition, faces final decision. He can order his forces to fight to the death, causing substantial casualties and damage, or he can surrender. Major General Jacques Leclerc, commanding the French 2nd Armored Division, sends emissaries demanding surrender. Von Koltitz requests meeting with French commanders. At 1430 hours, Leclerc arrives at the Hotel Meurice. The meeting, conducted in French with translation, proves brief. Leclerc demands unconditional surrender. Von Koltitz asks for terms guaranteeing treatment under Geneva Convention. Leclerc agrees. Von Koltitz asks whether his soldiers will be turned over to resistance forces or remain in military custody. Leclerc guarantees military custody. Von Koltitz then states, I surrender the German garrison of Paris. My soldiers will lay down their arms immediately. The surrender instrument signing occurs at 1515 hours. Von Coltitz signs on behalf of all German forces in Paris. Leclerc signs for Free French forces. The document specifies that German forces become prisoners of war, receiving treatment under international law. It also specifies that German forces will assist in maintaining order during the transition to prevent looting or revenge killings. The practical effect proves immediate. German soldiers throughout Paris, receiving radio orders from von Coltitz, surrender their positions. Most garrisons comply without resistance. A few isolated units, not receiving orders or refusing to surrender, fight on briefly before being overwhelmed. By 1800 hours, August 25th, organized German resistance in Paris ceases. Charles de Gaulle arrives in Paris at 1600 hours. He proceeds immediately to the prefecture of police, where he meets with resistance leaders and establishes his authority as head of the French government. The meeting proves tense. Communist leaders within the resistance expected to claim political power based on their role in the uprising. De Gaulle asserts authority based on his position as leader of Free France recognized by the Allies. The argument, while intense, ends with de Gaulle's authority accepted, partly because French armored forces loyal to de Gaulle control the city militarily. At 1700 hours, de Gaulle proceeds to the Hôtel de Ville for public appearance. The crowd, numbering over 100,000, fills the square. De Gaulle speaks briefly. Paris. Paris outraged. Paris broken. Paris martyred. But Paris liberated. Liberated by itself. Liberated by its people with the help of the armies of France. With the support and help of all France. Of France which fights. Of the only France. Of the real France. Of the eternal France. The speech, broadcast via radio and loudspeakers, establishes the narrative. Paris liberated itself with French military support. The American role receives minimal mention. The reality, more complex, involved resistance uprising, American operational approval, French armored assault, and German commanders' decision not to destroy the city. But de Gaulle's version, politically necessary, becomes the official history. Von Coltitz, meanwhile, enters captivity. French forces transport him to Leclerc's headquarters for interrogation. The questioning focuses on military matters, German force dispositions, remaining units outside Paris, defensive plans, but it also addresses the demolition orders. The interrogator asks directly, "General, did you receive orders to destroy Paris?" Von Coltitz responds, "Yes, I received such orders from the Führer himself." "Why did you not execute these orders?" "I am a soldier, not a vandal. The destruction would serve no military purpose and would create only suffering." This explanation, while noble in retrospect, oversimplifies von Coltitz's decision process. His memoirs, published in 1950 as Brent Paris, Is Paris Burning?, present himself as moral hero who defied Hitler to save Paris. The reality proves more nuanced. Von Coltitz delayed demolitions partly from practical recognition that he lacked time and resources to execute them effectively before Allied forces arrived. He also recognized that destroying Paris would guarantee his trial as war criminal after Germany's inevitable defeat. But acknowledging these practical considerations doesn't eliminate the moral dimension. Von Coltitz could have attempted partial destruction. He could have demolished several bridges, destroyed key monuments, burned government buildings. German forces in Warsaw executed similar orders enthusiastically. Von Coltitz chose not to, whether from military pragmatism, moral concern, or self-preservation. His choice saved Paris. The Swedish consul Nordling's role deserves recognition. His negotiations between von Coltitz, resistance leaders, and eventually Allied command created framework for surrender avoiding total destruction. Nordling, using his diplomatic status and personal relationships developed during 4 years in Paris, convinced all parties that negotiated outcome served everyone's interests better than fight to the death. The resistance contribution proved substantial but controversial. The uprising beginning August 19th forced von Coltitz to commit forces to urban combat, weakening his ability to defend against French armored attack. But the uprising also created humanitarian crisis and political tension. Communist elements within resistance hoped the uprising would establish their political authority before de Gaulle arrived. The strategy failed politically, but succeeded in tying down German forces. The Allied command's role proves complex. Eisenhower initially opposed liberating Paris immediately due to logistical concerns. but he yielded to de Gaulle's insistence, partly from political calculation, that maintaining good relations with Free French required supporting their priorities. Bradley's 12th Army Group provided operational authorization for Leclerc's advance. Patton's 3rd Army provided flank security. American forces entered Paris August 26th, one day after French forces, maintaining appearance of French-led liberation while ensuring Allied military presence. The casualties, while lighter than feared, remained significant. French military forces, approximately 1,000 killed or wounded. German forces, approximately 3,000 killed, wounded, or captured. Civilian casualties, approximately 1,500 killed, 3,000 wounded during the uprising and liberation. Property damage, minimal compared to other European cities, with most buildings remaining intact. The comparison to Warsaw proves instructive and horrifying. During the same period, August through October 1944, German forces systematically destroy Warsaw, killing over 200,000 civilians and demolishing over 80% of the city's buildings. The German commander in Warsaw, SS General Erich von dem Bach-Zelewski, receives identical orders to those given von Koltitz: suppress uprising, destroy city if necessary. Von dem Bach-Zelewski executes these orders thoroughly. Von Koltitz does not. Why the different outcomes? Several factors contribute. First, Warsaw's uprising proved larger and better organized, posing greater military threat requiring major German response. Second, SS units rather than Wehrmacht troops conducted Warsaw's suppression, with SS demonstrating greater willingness to commit atrocities. Third, Warsaw held greater strategic importance to German defense plans than Paris. Fourth, and perhaps most important, different commanders made different choices. Von dem Bach-Zelewski chose destruction. Von Koltitz chose preservation. The post-war fates vary dramatically. Von Koltitz remains prisoner of war until 1947. France tries him for war crimes related to actions in Rotterdam and Sevastopol, but acquits him for lack of evidence. His memoirs portray him as hero who saved Paris. The portrayal, while exaggerated, contains truth. He chose not to destroy the city when he had capacity and orders to do so. Whether hero or pragmatist, his choice preserved Paris. De Gaulle leverages the liberation to establish political authority. Within weeks, he forms provisional government, receives Allied recognition, and begins process of restoring French sovereignty. The liberation of Paris, particularly the narrative of self-liberation, proves essential to de Gaulle's claim that France remains great power deserving seat at post-war negotiations. Nordling continues diplomatic service, eventually becoming Swedish ambassador. His memoir, published in 1948, provides detailed account of negotiations leading to peaceful surrender. The memoir emphasizes moral courage of all parties involved while diplomatically avoiding claims that could embarrass French or German post-war governments. Leclerc commands French forces through war's end, participating in liberation of Strasbourg and advance into Germany. He dies in plane crash in 1947. De Gaulle eulogizes him as embodiment of Free France's military honor. Leclerc's role in liberating Paris, leading the first French forces into the city, secures his place in French national memory. The resistance fighters face more complex outcomes. Many receive official recognition and benefits. Others, particularly communists, face marginalization as de Gaulle consolidates power. The narrative of resistance heroism becomes politically important to France, helping obscure the collaborationist Vichy regime's role during occupation. The reality, nuanced and complicated, gives way to mythology serving political purposes. Paris itself bears surprisingly few physical scars. The bridges remain intact. Contrary to Hitler's orders, the Eiffel Tower stands undamaged. The Louvre, Notre Dame, Arc de Triomphe, all survive without significant damage. Some bullet holes mark building facades. Some streets require repair from tank traffic. But Paris emerges from 4 years of occupation and 1 week of combat fundamentally intact. This preservation, remarkable compared to other European cities, results from a combination of factors. Von Koltitz's decision not to execute demolition orders, quick French armored breakthrough preventing sustained combat, resistance coordination allowing negotiated surrenders, and Allied restraint in using heavy weapons during urban fighting. No single factor proves decisive. The combination preserved the city. The moral questions remain complex. Did von Koltitz deserve credit for not destroying Paris when he had orders and capacity to do so? Should commanders receive praise for not committing atrocities they could have committed? Does military pragmatism excuse consideration? Or does preservation of cities serve as moral imperative regardless of motivation? The comparison to other German commanders proves revealing. Many followed scorched earth orders enthusiastically, destroying cities, infrastructure, and populations during retreat. Some, like von Choltitz, delayed or avoided execution. A few, very few, actively resisted such orders. Von Choltitz falls in the middle category. He delayed. He made excuses. He avoided full execution. But he didn't openly refuse until military situation made execution impossible regardless. The liberation of Paris entered mythology almost immediately. The image of jubilant crowds greeting French tanks. De Gaulle striding down the Champs-Élysées. Liberation without destruction provided powerful symbol of freedom's triumph. The reality, messy and complicated, included political maneuvering, military pragmatism, moral compromises, and random fortune. But mythology, serving political and emotional needs, overwhelmed reality and popular memory. The tension between resistance, de Gaulle, and von Choltitz represented three different visions for Paris's fate. The resistance sought immediate liberation through uprising, accepting risk of destruction. De Gaulle sought liberation by French forces, establishing his political authority. Von Choltitz sought survival, recognizing the war lost and hoping to preserve his own life while appearing to follow orders. These competing interests, miraculously, aligned sufficiently that Paris survived. The question of what might have been proves unanswerable but compelling. If von Choltitz had executed Hitler's orders thoroughly, could he have destroyed Paris significantly before surrender? Almost certainly yes. The bridges required only detonating pre-placed charges. The monuments could be demolished by a single determined engineer unit. The government buildings could burn easily. That none of this occurred reflects von Choltitz's choice, conscious or unconscious, to delay and avoid rather than execute. If the resistance had not risen, would liberation have occurred differently? Possibly. Without urban uprising tying down German forces, von Choltitz might have organized more effective defense or executed more thorough demolition. But the resistance also risked triggering German response that destroyed the city. Their gamble succeeded partly through fortune, partly through German commanders' reluctance to fight to the last. If de Gaulle had not insisted on French liberation, would Americans have bypassed Paris longer? Likely yes. Eisenhower's preference for bypassing the city reflected sound military logic. Capturing Paris consumed resources better used pursuing German field armies. But political logic, maintaining Allied unity and supporting free French authority, trumped military logic. The decision proved correct politically if questionable militarily. The liberation of Paris occurred August 25, 1944. The event, celebrated annually in France, represents moment when liberation from occupation became reality. The German garrison surrendered. French authority returned. The city survived intact. The combination, neither inevitable nor expected, resulted from complex interaction of military developments, political calculations, personal decisions, and random chance. General Dietrich von Choltitz made choices, some conscious and some passive through delay, that preserved Paris. Whether he deserves title of savior remains debatable, but his choices mattered. Paris exists today partly because one German general, facing orders to destroy it, found ways not to execute those orders fully. The preservation reflects no single hero, but rather accumulation of decisions by many actors. Von Choltitz delaying, Nordling negotiating, resistance fighting, Leclerc advancing, de Gaulle politicking, Eisenhower yielding. The tension resolved not through single dramatic moment, but through series of compromises and coincidences that aligned sufficiently to preserve the city while changing governance. Paris survived. France liberated itself with Allied help. De Gaulle established authority. Von Choltitz saved his life. The resistance gained honor. The monuments stood intact. These outcomes, individually unlikely and collectively improbable, occurred through combination of factors no single participant controlled. The liberation of Paris represents not triumph of heroes, but rather fortunate alignment of competing interests that produced outcome beneficial to all except Hitler, whose orders went disobeyed, and resistance communist faction, whose political ambitions went unfulfilled. The bridges stand, the monuments rise, the city lives. General von Choltitz disobeyed Hitler. The resistance fought. De Gaulle claimed authority. Paris survived. The liberation occurred. History records the results. The complexity, nuance, and fortune underlying those results fade into mythology of glorious liberation. But the complexity deserves remembering. Paris survived through decisions, compromises, delays, and fortune. Not through heroism alone, through human choices, made under pressure, producing outcomes that preserved beauty for future generations.